If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, editor, poet, and award-winning author of middle grade novel Jet Cooper. I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer, a best-selling writer. I got to add that in there now that Melanie has award-winning. And I'm a story editor. And I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Murder, She Said, so that we can study the 4 types of protagonists. This 1961 film was directed by George Pollock from a screenplay by David Purcell and Jack Seddon, and it's based on the novel The 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie. Now, of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And please help other writers find our show by leaving rating and reviews. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like button and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. All right, Valerie, this is a new, interesting topic, probably not one that's discussed in many other places. So what are the 4 types of protagonists?
Right. I'm excited. I'm excited for this one because you're right. I only came across it once in one theory book and they didn't elaborate on it. So this is all my own research. So I think it's going to be fun. Before I get into it, though, I've got a little bit of trivia and I like story trivia. So I'm going to toss it out. So Melanie already said that Murder, She Said is based on Agatha Christie's novel. To be honest, though, I'm not sure how close it is to Christie's book because I haven't read that book in a long time. Something makes me think it's not actually that close, but I don't know. I'd have to reread the book. Now, the TV show that I'm sure we all know and love, Murder, She Wrote, took its name from this film. It is an homage to this movie and to Agatha Christie. Also, a little Easter egg in there for you. The actress who is playing Mrs. Kidder, that's the cranky housekeeper, is Joan Hickson. And Joan went on to play Miss Marple in the BBC series. So there's lots of little story trivia things in there that make me happy. All right, now let me get on to the theory behind my topic this season. I'm actually building on the work that Melanie did last season on constant characters and the work I did way back in season 8 on cast design. So when we start out to write a book, it doesn't take long before somebody puts a character sheet under our nose and says, here, fill this thing out and you're off to the races. And on that sheet tends to be things like what the character looks like, what actress or actor do they look like. You know, you can put a picture of them right at the top of the sheet and then you're good to go. Or what job does this character have? What food does she have for breakfast and all that kind of stuff. Now, while these things may be very important to your story, depending on the type of story that you're writing, they might equally be completely irrelevant to your story. Again, depending on the type of story that you want to write. What really matters here, whether the physical presentation of the person is relevant to your story or not, what is really important here is knowing what kind of person the main character is. Now, to do this, we have to decide if the character arcs or if the story arcs. So we need to identify the character's dimensions, and we need to know what type of character, what type of protagonist we are creating. Now, when it comes to protagonists, there are 4 types, and the 4 types, the reason that they're in these categories is because of their relationship to the reader or viewer and their relationship to the other characters in the story. So the 4 types are the hero or heroine, the everyman, everywoman, the underdog, and the anti-hero. So today I'm focusing on the hero/heroine. In a nutshell, the hero is any character that is somehow greater than the reader or viewer. Now, when I say greater than, it could be a literal superhero, right? Someone with superhuman powers like strength or speed, which makes the character physically superior to a human. But it could also be a human character who is extremely talented in some way. For example, you could have a lawyer who is vastly superior to all the other lawyers and who has a knowledge of the law that allows her to use it in a way that no other lawyer can. Back in season 2, I talked about the hero's gift expressed. Now, with the hero type of protagonist, the gift, it's not just a gift that's a little bit better than the other characters. It is vastly superior to the other characters. So it's not that she's a good lawyer in a firm of pretty good lawyers. She is the best of the best of the best of the best of lawyers, not just in her firm, but in her industry. It's got to be that level of quote unquote greater than any other lawyer in the story. Think back to season 16 and the episode we did on Backdraft. There are 2 protagonists in that story. And I said that the Stephen McCaffrey character, that's the one played by Kurt Russell, I said that he is a hero. And he is. He is such a good firefighter that he has a reputation that is legendary. I mean, he is the firefighter that all of the other firefighters look up to. They have these stories about how he somehow seemed to be superhuman in the way that he rescued that person or he put out that fire or whatever. He is so good that his younger brother, Brian, cannot live up to the comparison. And that's what he's trying to do the whole film. And it's not just Brian who can't live up to Stephen's reputation. None of the other firefighters can either. No one in that movie, in that fictional world, will ever be as good at fighting fires as Stephen. That's what makes him the singular hero of that film. In Murder, She Said, Miss Marple is a hero. In fact, in mysteries, sort of broadly speaking, the main character, whether it's a professional detective or an amateur sleuth, typically in a mystery, the main character is a hero because they are smarter than any other character in the book, including the villain, or especially the villain, even though the villain is really clever. And they are smarter than any other character who might also be investigating the crime. So in this case, you've got Miss Marple, who is an amateur sleuth. There's also a professional police officer who's investigating. Miss Marple is better. If your main character is a professional detective, he or she will have colleagues, some of whom are superiors or bosses, like in their chain of command. Your protagonist is still more clever or more skilled at solving crimes than even those people who are higher up on the corporate ladder. In a story with an amateur sleuth, or maybe a consulting detective like Poirot or Sherlock Holmes, of course, that main character will be more clever than whoever the professional police officer is investigating the crime. Their powers of observation and deduction, and it tends to be those powers of observation and deduction, are vastly superior. Not just a little bit better, vastly better. When the main character is a hero, they are often, not always, often constant characters. By that I mean they don't change who they are. Stephen McCaffrey is a superior firefighter at the beginning of the film, and he's a superior firefighter at the end of the film. Miss Marple is extremely logical and observant at the beginning of all the Marple mysteries. And she is all of that and more at the end. She also has a real keen understanding of what makes a person tick. And this is often the thing that the professional investigator is missing in a Marple mystery, and why she can put two and two together when the police just can't. So if you recall the work that Melanie did on constant characters, you'll remember that it's not these characters that have an arc, right? They don't change. What changes is the world around them, and it changes because of them. Miss Marple is a constant character. Most main characters in crime stories are constant characters. And I say most because I'm sure there's an exception out there. I can't think of one at the moment, but I'm sure it exists. And if it doesn't exist, it might be a really good way to innovate the genre. I expect it would be challenging, because if most characters are constant characters in crime stories, then that's what a reader's going to expect. But hey, it can be done. And maybe you're the person to do it. Maybe you have that idea, and this is the edge that you've been looking for to make your crime story come to life. I don't know. Give it a try and see what happens. So, with all of that said, let's take a look at Miss Marple in Murder, She Said. Okay, so as I was studying the movie this week, I had some questions in my mind, namely, what is it that makes Miss Marple a hero? And how is she superior to the other characters? Well, first of all, Miss Marple can identify the difference between one, a dream and a reality, and two people having sex versus a murder being committed. That puts her ahead. I know it sounds so crazy when I say it like that, but I swear to God, that is what's in the movie. Like the train conductor thinks that she fell asleep and dreamt the whole thing because she was reading a mystery novel. And then Inspector Craddock tells her that she didn't actually see a woman being strangled to death. What she saw was a married couple, not just two people, a married couple having sex in the train next to her. I mean, come on. So are these two things enough to say that Miss Marple is a hero? No, I don't think so. At this point in the film, no. What this does is establish society's view of women like Miss Marple. And by that I mean women, older women like Miss Marple, who could be anywhere from, 60s to 90s, depending on the Marple novel you are reading. They're old, they're not widows. What's the word I'm looking for? Spinsters. They're old spinsters. They are easily ignored. They are written off, and they are quote unquote doddering. However, when it comes to Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple is in fact vastly superior. Craddock and the officials he works with conducted a preliminary search in the typical manner, right? That they would go about conducting any search. And they didn't find anyone matching the description of the woman that Miss Marple saw. He is therefore content to leave it at that. Craddock's role in the story is to establish what the typical law enforcement officer would do. So remember I said that the hero is quote unquote superior in some way. And superior is a relative term. So for Miss Marple to seem extraordinary, we need to have a character who is ordinary to compare her to. And that's Craddock. All right, so how is Miss Marple superior? Well, we've got three different ways clearly articulated in this film. The first one is that it's Miss Marple who finds the body. So the first time we see this superior intellect she has comes at about 9 minutes into the film. And it's when Miss Marple uses the train schedule and the map to figure out where the dead body must have been dumped. Now, these are basic, easily available tools. Yet, the police were not able to use them to figure out where along the track a body might have been dumped. Because remember, Craddock said that they, quote, searched every inch of the tracks for the whole length of the line. Miss Marple didn't have to do that. It didn't take her long to take the schedule and the map and go, it had to be between these two small points. And it was a pretty easy math problem, like the kind of math problems you give grade 5 students. That's what she did. And that made her vastly superior to the professional investigator. So Miss Marple did not have to search the whole length of the line, nor did the police take into account that along at least a certain stretch of the line, there was a big ravine. So if they only checked along the track, they didn't think to look down the ravine and see if maybe there was a body down there. Miss Marple did. And she went down. This, elderly lady had no problem going down, and presto magico, she found proof. Okay, so the second way that Miss Marple demonstrates her superiority of intellect is that she identifies the body. So Craddock identifies the body as Martine Akenthorpe, but he's wrong. So the killer has laid these little clues for him to lead him to believe that this is Martine, that this woman is Martine. And Craddock takes it hook, line, and sinker. He falls for it. It's Miss Marple, though, who accurately identifies the victim as the doctor's wife, and that is the key to unlocking the whole mystery. It's not Martine at all. Finally, it's Miss Marple who solves the mystery. At 1 hour and 16 minutes, Miss Marple declares that she knows who the murderer is. Craddock hasn't got a clue. He genuinely has no idea. Miss Marple has to tell him that it's not actually Martine who died. So Craddock is really out in left field. Now, when Miss Marple tells Craddock she knows who the killer is, the scene ends there. So we know that Miss Marple is telling him who it is, but we, the audience, are kept in the dark. And that's to keep us in suspense so that we keep watching and we're really interested and we can't wait to see what happens next. So Miss Marple and Craddock hatch a plan to get the killer to reveal himself. And this is the scene that happens next. It's the denouement of the whole film. And of course, that's what the denouement does in a mystery, right? It reveals who the killer is. Now, I said off the top that the hero is superior to the reader and other characters. I just really talked about how Miss Marple is superior to the other characters. Now I just want to underscore how she is superior to us, the reader. And it's that she solved the case and we didn't. Right? The reader wants to try and solve the case. And in the murder mysteries that I love the best, we have the clues. We're given everything we need to know. There's nothing held back and not revealed until 2 pages before the end or 2 pages before the denouement or something. All the clues are there. And if we're clever, we might be able to connect the dots. We usually can't. In fact, we don't really want to solve it. We want to solve it, but we don't want to solve it, if that makes sense. We really want the character, whether it's a professional detective or an amateur sleuth, we really want them to solve the mystery first, because then we're in awe of them. We wonder how they did it. And we want to read the next book featuring that character. It's really simple. It's so simple, yet so difficult to pull off. All right. Melanie, that's everything I have to say about the hero character or hero protagonist type. For this episode, how did you go with your study of the premise this week?
Well, I'm doing something a bit different this season with the premise because it's a very, very specific and very narrow, I suppose, area to study. But I think it's incredibly important as well. And so that's why I wanted to come back and revisit it. And I also wanted to revisit it for selfish reasons. It's because I'm starting to write my companion novel for my middle grade novel. So I want to get it right this time because I don't want it to take 11 years. This time I need it to take a lot less time. And having a premise is actually going to help me. And I'll explain why in a minute. So the premise is a one-word sentence summary of your story. And it sounds really simple, doesn't it? but it actually is a lot harder to write this and understand this. It's a lot harder than it sounds. So what I want to do this season is road test some methods and some formulas that I've been collecting and see how they work, and if some are more suited to specific genres or if they all work across, all genres or all types of stories. Now, there is a lot of power in getting your premise right at the start of your story. It's because it becomes your guiding light and it becomes the principle which everything in your story must be judged against. Now, this is probably striking fear into the heart of all pantsers right now. But at some stage, pantsers will need to come up with a premise, that one sentence summary. Now, that summary has multiple purposes, not just for writing your story, but it can be used in your query letters, back cover blurbs, your synopsis, and I think most importantly, if someone asks you on the fly what your book is about, you will have a prepared, punchy answer. And that is a fantastic thing to have in your back pocket because you never know who you might meet in an elevator at any point in any given time. All right, so the sooner you get your premise written, the sooner it will be that you can talk about your story and summarize your story. Now, the premise can also be known as, or you can write a log line, which will do a very similar thing. And a log line is very much what the film industry use to describe, the story or the movie in one simple sentence. And it's used again to pitch and to summarize movie concepts. So this is how powerful a premise is. Now, this season, I have 5 various ways to approach the premise, and I might find some more as I keep researching throughout the season, and I'll bring those in if I do. But already, what's interesting is that most of the ones that I have, or my little collection of premises, is that they use the 4 story questions that Valerie explained and tested in season 13. And this is important. You can either write your premise first and apply it to your story's 4 questions, or you can answer your 4 story questions and write your premise. Either way, both of these tools will help you write your story as a foundational piece. If you ever work with me for a developmental edit or ask me to do a diagnostic of your novel, one of the things that I'll ask you is, what's your premise? And if you don't have one, then I will write one based on what I read. And I will use it as a foundational way to provide comments and feedbacks and to give you a reference point for why I'm making the comments or giving you the feedback that I'm going to give you. Now, the reason I do this is because it's an excellent reference point, like I mentioned, and it is extremely helpful when writers are having difficulty understanding the one thing that their story is about. So if there's no way to work out what your premise is, then this is a huge story problem, because the premise usually forms the spine of your story, or it's derived from the spine of your story. And if it's clear, you can get a premise. If it's not clear, it's extremely difficult to do that. Now, I first started to understand the power of the premise when I read The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. Now, Truby has a whole chapter on how to use a premise to develop and test story ideas. But I'm not going to go through that. I'm just going to focus on the premise only. And Truby summarizes the premise as, and I'm going to paraphrase here because it's really this kind of vague in the book. He kind of says that it's a simple combination of character plot and an event that starts the action. And he also says that readers need to get a sense of the characters and the outcome of the story. So that's really about as much guidance as he gives readers of his book. But then he goes on to give really good examples. And one of those examples is from The Godfather. And so this is what he has for The Godfather. The youngest son of a mafia family takes revenge on the men who shot his father and becomes the new godfather. And that's on pages 16 and 17 of his book. Now, if you've seen The Godfather, I think you'll agree that this is a pretty good summary of the story. And I can see how everything in the movie touches on the premise. So if we think about this, and we'll just break this down a little bit. So the protagonist is the youngest son of a mafia family. The action and motivation, or the plot, is about revenge. The incident that begins everything is the shooting of his father. And the sense of an ending is that the son becomes the new godfather. Now, Truby doesn't give any more instruction other than this general content and, like I said, plenty of examples. So it's worth reading and worth going in and having a look at how he uses the premise or how he summarizes really famous and well-known movies. But now we come back to Murder, She Said. So how would I apply Truby's sort of guidance, I suppose, to this movie? And here's what I roughly drafted, right? So an elderly amateur sleuth becomes a housemaid to investigate a murder she saw out the window of a train, and she escapes death when confronting the killer. Now, sure, that needs refining and tweaking, but I think it's a reasonable summary, and it would get your story started and on the right path. So I watched the movie once and I drafted this premise. Then I watched it a second time to see if all the story elements agreed with the premise. And for most of the story, they absolutely did. Now, secondly, there is a great downloadable PDF from the website Studio Binder. And the PDF has two methods to write a log line. So I'm going to use both of those methods throughout the season, but the one that I'll use today has the following layout. And it has the inciting incident, plus the protagonist, plus action, plus the antagonist equals your log line. All right, and again, this PDF has some really good examples of how that formula works when describing quite famous and well-known movies. And one of the examples is from Silence of the Lambs. Now, this is what it says, or this is quoted from the PDF. In order to catch a killer who skins his victims, a young FBI cadet must seek help from an incarcerated and manipulative killer. All right, so we'll break it down again. So the inciting incident is there's a killer who skins his victims. So there's a killer on the loose. The protagonist is a young FBI cadet. The action is that she seeks help to catch the killer. So there's actually two lots of action in this log line. So it's the seeking help and the catching of the killer. And the antagonist, and again, there's two, is there's a killer on the loose. And then there's the incarcerated and manipulative killer, who's, we know is Hannibal Lecter, right? So does this log line work? Well, yes, it's a great example of a pitch, a summary, and a premise. Does everything in Silence of the Lamb fit under this premise? Yes, it does. So now let's try this for Murder, She Said. There's the inciting incident, the protagonist, the action, and the antagonist, right? So that's the framework. So here's my attempt at this. So a woman is strangled by a man on an afternoon train, and it's witnessed by an amateur sleuth. And she seeks employment as a housemaid in the estate where she thinks the body is hidden. So I've got there the inciting incident that a woman is strangled. The protagonist is the amateur sleuth. The action is that she seeks employment as a housemaid, and the antagonist is a man. It's okay, right? It's okay. But if I rearrange it to this, then we have something slightly different. An amateur sleuth sees a woman being strangled by an anonymous man on a passing train. When she searches for proof of the murder clues, they lead her to assume the role of a housemaid so that she can continue her investigation. So yes, again, this can be shortened, and I've changed the order around by placing the protagonist first, but it's a good enough summary to know that everything in the story is captured. Now, the biggest difference between these two approaches is that Truby's method has a sense of the ending, whereas the first logline doesn't. The logline approach identifies the antagonist, but Truby's approach doesn't call that out specifically. So I'm going to pay attention to this throughout the season and see if one works better than the other in terms of being a good premise for writers to use. Now, as I've mentioned, I've got about 5 different approaches that I'm going to test this season, including the ones that I've just trialed above. Now, secretly, I'm hoping that there are 1 or 2 movies this season that don't fit with their premise so that we can talk about the impact on the story, and how a good premise can prevent bad story outcomes. But we might have to wait for the What Went Wrong episode to fully test this out, depending on what we've got coming up this season. But so that's why I'm studying. That's how I'm sort of going to look at it and analyze stories this season, just to see if there's one method that's better than the other. So Valerie, what are your final thoughts about Murder, She Said?
Well, actually, I've got an action step this week, and it is simply this. I want everyone to stop and think about what kind of protagonist they are writing about. If your protagonist is a hero or a heroine, ask yourself how she is superior to all of the other characters in your story, and how is she superior to your reader.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss Sicario. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. For the power to write a best-selling story, visit storynerd.ca/courses. And to join Valerie's Inner Circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And for more information about my books, visit melaniehill.au. And remember that story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.